You're with Julian on the Brown Note. The Age of Cage, a celebration of Nicolas Cage after playing Nick Cave. And I've gone on at length about how much I worship at the altar of this, not just an actor, but perhaps a deity. And we have been allowed to exist in the same time as Nicolas Cage. And we should be very happy about this, about the joy that he has brought to us and the lessons that he can teach us. So he began his lot in life. The first time I saw him in a film was Rumblefish, and he was pretty rubbish in that as well. Francis Ford Coppola, his relative at that point, I think around 1983, had given him a little bit of a breakthrough. I will do a Gone But Forgotten for Rumblefish. I think it's a masterpiece. Matt Dillon, Dennis Hopper and Mickey Rourke, all at their finest. A fantastic, unbelievably good film. Wipes the floor with The Outsiders, which was not very good. Both of them were written by the same author, and he made the films back to back. And because The Outsiders has got people like Tom Cruise in it, it overshadows Rumblefish. But The Outsiders was pretty naff, and Rumblefish is great. And he had some terrible roles. Peggy Sue got married. He wasn't exactly great in that. And there was definitely a perception of him at that point as being a Nepo baby or a Nepo niece or nephew because of his association with the Coppola family and so on. And then he really came to his own in the 90s as this Oscar-winning actor from one of the all-time downer movies, Leaving Las Vegas. 4 films where he was an action lead as well, like classics like The Rock and Con Air, which established him as a major box office star, and also for Vampire's Kiss and films like that, which were trashed by critics, but have become almost memes for his gonzo performance style. And other actors have spoken about him as well. I think Ethan Hawke said that he's the only actor to have brought something new to the table in the last 50 years. Or that he is, the next Marlon Brando. The fact that his style of acting is so intense and different that he always brings something to terrible films as well as good ones. But it all sort of unraveled in the early 2000s where, Bringing Out the Dead is one of Martin Scorsese's best films. It's a masterpiece. I've got a review that I did on this show online still, and I think it's a unique and outstanding film with an incredible performance by Nick Cage. I'm going to say Cage all the way through. Nicolas Cage in that film as an ambulance driver, and the absolute wits like burning out through the grief he goes through from resuscitating people and so on. It's an amazing film. But I thought I'd do my favourite 10 Nicolas Cage films over the last 20 years, because this period initially was regarded as him being in that same bracket as Bruce Willis, of taking any paycheck and starring in terrible films, and his career had gone into the handbasket. But a lot of people have now changed their opinion about him, because he's been forced into a lot of indie films, and some of them have come up roses, where he's starred in these amazing films that he might not have actually ended up being in if he was still a massive Tom Cruise level box office draw. So from the last 20 years, my 10 favourite Nicolas Cage films, and I will watch anything that he's in, including the dire ones, and there's many I could have included more, but my 10 favourite Nicolas Cage films from the last 20 years. So at number 10, Knowing from 2009, is the best M. Night Shyamalan film that he never directed. And that's a good thing, because he's always a terrible director apart from Unbroken and maybe a couple of films. He is one of the worst directors of the modern era next to Michael Bay. But Knowing, I thought, was a fascinating film. It doesn't convert all the way. An end-of-the-world supernatural film about finding codes that predict disasters like plane crashes and so on. So he finds these code numbers where it relates to a date and the number of people that have died. I thought it was actually a pretty fascinating film. It's very downbeat, which is too downbeat and too still at the time, but I've watched it a few times, and I do think it's very good. It's also got some incredible sequences, like the plane crash sequence in it is amazing. At number 9, 2005's Lord of War, the earliest film on the list. Nicolas Cage is great in this film about the arms industry. A very honest take on, an unusually honest take on the way that the arms industry works through the lens of one of the arms dealers and his relationship with post-Soviet Ukraine and what happened to all of the enormous billions and billions of dollars of weapons that disappeared from the Soviet era and ended up on the black market. But it's a black comedy more than anything else, and I thought it was absolutely superb. Jared Leto is actually very good in it as well, and Bridget Moynahan is, Ian Holm and Ethan Hawke. It's got a really good cast, and I thought it was a very underappreciated film. And number 8, the most controversial choice, The Wicker Man. Now, I'm a fan of terrible movies, and I think there is like a terrible movie that's very poorly made and very slow and very difficult to get into is unwatchable. But then you get films that are fast-paced, high production values, and you're never left alone for 5 minutes without something absolutely insane happening. So we've got The Room is the famous standard of bad movies this century, and probably before that Plan 9 from Outer Space was. But I mean, Plan 9 from Outer Space is just a very, very badly made movie, which is often funny. But The Wicker Man, which is a straight remake of one of the best British films post 1970, which is still regarded as a masterpiece and one of the great horrors of all time, and one of the most influential. You only have to see absolute trash like Midsummer to see how influential it is. The Wicker Man ranks above The Room with me, as does the film by Sia called Music, which was also trashed, which I also gave a good review for because of the fact it's really fast-paced, it's beautifully produced, it's very technicolor, and you're never 5 minutes away from something where you just cannot believe what you're watching. The Wicker Man is exquisitely produced and shot. It's got some big name actors in there. And the amount of scenes from the Oh My Eyes, the Bees, and him punching out 3 women virtually in a row. And you're just sitting at the screen going, what am I watching? Dressed as a bear, cycling through the woods, being chased by women dressed as a bear and then punching one of them out. And the scene where he's like talking about the cuddly toy is just amazing. There is so many scenes in this film which are just exquisite. It is the pinnacle of bad movies and so enjoyable this century. The Wicker Man at number 8. At number 7, Colour Out of Space. Him dipping his toe into Lovecraftian horror. Richard Stanley, who's got a storied history as a director. I think he did The Island of Dr. Moreau in the 90s and that fabled disaster of a production. I think he was sacked from it and didn't direct until this, like 20 years later or something. A Lovecraftian horror about an object landing in the family home of Nicolas Cage's family garden and gradually mutating over time. Beautiful visuals, a really interesting film. Number 6, a film that not many people have seen and should. If you like true crime dramas or the serial killer dramas, particularly Silence of the Lambs, The Frozen Ground from 2013, about the real-life serial killer in Canada called Robert Hansen, who's one scary dude, and played brilliantly by John Cusack. So Nicolas Cage is a cop, John Cusack is a serial killer, and he is very, very strong in this film as a serial killer. He's very misogynistic and very mannered in his intellect. Some of the interactions when they sort of start questioning him about the crimes are fantastic. It's a great film. It's really slimy and sleazy and dark, and it paints a really good portrait of the lower end of society. Hansen preyed on basically young girls forced into prostitution in Canada and used to murder them, with the caveat that he used to own a small plane, and he was married with children, and led a apparently normal life, although you could tell what an arsehole he was at home as well. But he used to fly these girls out into the wilderness in Canada and do a sort of hunting Hunger Games thing with them, where he'd sort of like let them off and then just shoot them as they ran away. Real messed up stuff, but very, very good film. I think co-produced by 50 Cent, who's in the, I think he's in the cast as well. Well worth watching if you like that kind of true crime thing. It's pretty hard-edged though. And that was number 6. At number 5, a recent film, 2022, The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which was a Being John Malkovich kind of film for Nicolas Cage, where he plays himself as a film star who is basically bought to spend time with this billionaire played by Pedro Pascal, who's his biggest fan. It's very funny and touching and heartwarming. It didn't do very well at the box office, but it's just a romp as the two become embroiled in this action adventure mystery film. It's a hugely entertaining film. At number 4, Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans. A controversial film on release because the Abel Ferrara Bad Lieutenant starring Harvey Keitel is arguably the pinnacle of that kind of bad cop film. Incredibly controversial when it came out. And this one was directed by Werner Herzog, like one of the most legendary directors, but was a completely different style and tone. So in the first film, Harvey Keitel is the worst human being alive, who comes to some form of epiphany about how evil he is. Like, he's this cop and he's just wall-to-wall drugs, alcohol, prostitution, criminal acts against the people he's supposed to be looking after. But comes to some kind of salvational moments towards the back half of the movie. But this one's got a very light touch compared. It's more of a black surreal comedy, and Nicolas Cage is a character that has gone through the same things, but he's nowhere near as dark. He's actually a really quite nice bloke. So he has his problems with addiction and so on, but he's actually a nice guy. He's not like the real darkness of the original film, and I think Abel Ferrara complained that they'd named it Bad Lieutenant when it didn't need to be named Bad Lieutenant. And 3 classics to end. 2021's Pig. One of the things that I love most about Nicolas Cage is his range as an actor. He can do the gung-ho action films. He can do completely gonzo performances like we saw in Longlegs, one of the big horror films of this year, which I thought was overrated. But he can also do very still, dark roles where he doesn't say much equally well, and Pig is his most silent film. He starts as a broken down recluse living in a caravan in the woods who is famed for being one of the best chefs in New Orleans that just withdrew completely from life. And he had a prize-winning truffle pig. And that's the titular pig, who was stolen by ne'er-do-wells. And he spends the rest of the movie trying to find his prize-winning truffle pig, who's his only friend in the world. And it's a brilliant film. It starts very, very still and silent, and gradually his life unfolds, and his performance is magnificent in that. And then we come to 2 of my favourites. Actually, these 3 I think are all classics. Up there with the likes of Hereditary and The Witch as far as horror movie goes is Panos Cosmatos' film from 2018, Mandy, which is one of the wildest horror films released this century. An unbelievably stylized movie with an incredibly intense and insane performance from Nicolas Cage. And also Andrea Riseborough as his partner in it. So he's kind of painted as a very dark man who's now teetotal and lives with Andrea, and you kind of get these whiffs of he was a particularly violent man in the past. He flies in and out of logging sites, and they're fine, they're on their own. Into the mix comes this shaman-esque cult leader and he basically tries to seduce the Andrea character by force. And when she's mocking him, he basically kills her in the most appalling ways possible in front of Nicolas Cage, who then sets out on a vendetta, which is some of the wildest cinema that I've ever seen. It's unbelievably heavy on the coloration, on the stylization of the visuals and the music as well. Who did the music? Johan Johansson, no surprise there. I think deceased Icelandic composer. All round an aesthetic treat and a masterpiece. Number one, I'm going to go with Joe. I said recently when I was reviewing his new film, and I can't remember what it was called, but basically the guy that did Shotgun Diaries and then did Take Care, and in one of the best films about mental health I've ever seen, made a film called Mud, and whatever their director's name was famed for his southern films where they take place in, like, you know, the swampy Louisiana sort of area. And I really didn't like Mud. I thought it was like a Disney-fied version of his style. But then the director David Gordon Green released the film Joe. And it was everything that I'd expected Mud to be. Nicolas Cage runs a team of, ironically, given that he was logging in the previous film, but people at the very bottom of society that wait around at truck stops for a job in the morning. And he runs a team of people that they go out into the forest and they kill trees when they're about to, I guess, rezone it for housing or whatever. And they go out there with these very toxic chemicals and they start spraying around. And that's his life, and he's a massive alcoholic. But he's a hugely charismatic and interesting person that commands a great deal of respect. And it's one of my favourite performances. He's so engaging in it, and it's got a great cast. Ty Sheridan as a young boy who's only like 15 or 16, who lives in the most depraved conditions in something from a bygone era, where his dad's this horrendous alcoholic, very abusive, and the family have no money, and the kids are like, you know, possibly going to be abused from a young age by people that know his dad. And, you know, where incest and stuff like that goes on. It's really bleak. The performance by, is it Ronnie Jean Bevins? No, Gary Poulter. Sorry, Gary Poulter is the father. He is a real-life street bum who had a couple of roles in TV shows and appeared in this film. And he plays the alcoholic dad who beats Will Poulter's character to a pulp every day he can, and just sits in the grass drinking whiskey. And it wasn't far removed from Gary Poulter's life. Before the film came out, he was found dead in a puddle after being on the street. It's an amazing film. It's got incredible characters that are brilliantly drawn, and it's my favourite Nicolas Cage performance of the century. So thank you, Nicolas Cage. And I will light my candle to you as I do every night. And that was The Age of Cage. And this